Now we'll be turning our attention to the financial side of innovation. Please welcome Ms. Scarlett CHEN, Managing Partner at Verge HealthTech Fund, who will be discussing venture funding for startups.
All right, good morning all. So first of all, thank you so much, Professor Kenny, for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here today. So first of all, I wanted to do a poll first of the audience. Who here has actually raised any kind of funding at all for your company, for your research, etc.? Raise your hands if you have. Okay, I see a few hands. Okay, who here has raised any institutional funding from, for example, VC funds, venture capital funds? Okay, no one in the audience. So this will be interesting, I think, for many of you, because it is a topic that people often talk about. You know, Silicon Valley, so fun, so innovative, so many breakthroughs. But at the same time, how do you actually do it? Because it's actually pretty hard. So before I get started, so I'm managing partner at Verge HealthTech Fund. We are a specialized fund that only invests into healthcare technologies. And health tech, in our definition, is any technologies that really amplifies the current healthcare system. And we include next generation diagnostics, breakthrough smart devices. We do a lot in AI. We do a lot in digital therapeutics. So it's really kind of the frontier of the future of healthcare. So going into now funding. The first slide is really about different options. So before we even get into kind of VC funding, we want to understand what are the other options available, which are perhaps a little simpler than going into a VC fund and talking to these venture capitalists, greedy venture capitalists who only want to take part of your company for a little bit of money. So we go into the options first. So the first one that I often think about is actually bootstrapping. So how do you actually then use your own capital to then deliver what you want? This by far is the easiest because you are convinced of your own project and you want to actually do this well. So, and I often say that it's good to then just prove that with your own resources. So bootstrapping is what I very much consider to be kind of the first port of call. Now that's a little harder in the biomedical fields. Certainly when it comes down to kind of things that use a lot of research money. But if it's like, for example, software, these days it's relatively easy, believe it or not, to be able to create software, to be able to code. And, we have now invested in companies that have actually, gone very far, created the product using vibe coding, for example. Who here knows vibe coding? Okay, a few hands as well. Thank you. Vibe coding is just that you talk to the computer program, right? You just say, here's what I want, right? And the computer program actually does that for you. So you don't have to hire a whole team of engineers. So we've now invested in actually AI native companies like that to be able to just do, a lot actually with very little. So I always encourage people to think about that first, right? How far can you go with your own money? And then, of course, as for external sources, before we go into kind of VC funding, it could be like, for example, non-dilutive funding, anything from research grants, academic grants, etc., government support. So Hong Kong is great for that. When you look at, you're here in the Science Park. Science Park has all these different schemes, which are excellent. Different universities has different, schemes. Tissue, for example, Race Plus. All these are government supported schemes. They are fantastic when it comes down to actually getting some funding started. Of course, you can go into angels. So angels, they're called angels because they are really angels, right? They're angels to you. These are friends and family members who actually support you and believe in what you do. And they might not be familiar with how funding is usually done, but they're happy to just, give you something to help you get started. There's also crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is very often without even taking a stake in your company. So it's just simply, we want to support, right? We want to support you for what you're doing. And that's a great source as well. And I see this actually gaining popularity as time goes on. Incubator, accelerator programs, there are some of that in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in China as well. And then something that we sometimes ignore, but recently this is new to me because I didn't know that banks would have so much appetite for small and medium enterprises. Recently, I was invited to speak at a Standard Chartered event, and they were really talking about this. So I was highly encouraged to see that they actually have the appetite for this. Now, going into VC funding. In this very complex chart, so ignore everything here. I want you to focus on the middle part, which is, there's really kind of three different areas. It's, as VCs, right, how do we look at the business? We look at kind of the three different areas. Number one is the actual business itself. Number two is the team, because we're very early stage. We want to know who's actually doing this and whether the team is good. And then the third part is everything around the deal. And I'll go into these specifically. So for the business side, we typically look at kind of two different areas. One is the market, right? Is there for example, a large addressable market that has a real need for, your invention? I love, Professor Mori's, first speech here. I thought that was something that I can definitely relate to. It's not about the technology itself. It's about, does the market see a need, right, for this particular technology? And then creating everything around that user need. So it might not be large, actually. Sometimes it could be just, a niche market. But if you can dominate that market, great, do that. Right, so the market itself has to be attractive, and the technology has to be something that's actually very suitable for that market. And then, in addition to that, especially in the health tech field, we think about kind of four different things. Number one is the tech. Number two is the regulatory. Number three is clinical, and number four is the business model. And I'll go into these. So number one, technology. Technology moves on very quickly. It has been advancing very quickly. If you don't have for example, the right kind of, patterns that Jennifer has talked about, I thought that session was brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that. All the strategy around that, the technology, can they be replicated easily? Right, we look for that. And given that, if you have a sensor technology, well, sensors are advancing just so quickly these days, right? If this is from 10 years ago, I don't know if it's still relevant today. So everything around the technology itself, that's the first one. Second one, regulatory strategy. Are you a 510K clearance, which is hopefully a little nice and easy compared to the other routes. Maybe that's going to be 9 to 12 months. If you're going for de novo actually means that you're doing this for the, nobody has done this before. You are the first one, right? It's a real invention. Then, you need to be mentally prepared for something like that. And VCs, as us, we also need to prepare ourselves for what kind of journey is this? Is this going to hit the market next year? Or is this going to be let's, wait for 2 years and see whether they can even get the de novo, or whether, there's just negative from the FDA pre-subs. Then that tells you kind of, how you should be positioning your strategy as well. The third is clinical. So actually proving that you have clinical outcome. This is super important. Clinical, could be, you can be a pre-clinical company, you can be a clinical company, but really proving that your technology actually works, and you need to do probably some clinical trials for that. And all that costs money, all that takes time. And then the fourth part is the actual business model. I cannot emphasize how important the business model is. This is, again, relating to, I think, what Professor Mori has mentioned. The business model really comes down to two different parts. So the first part is distribution. How do you get your product into the hands of your customer? And in healthcare, this is not a straight line. unless you're a direct-to-consumer, which means you might be a wellness device. But how do you actually get there? Sometimes you have to go through layers and layers of distributors and then into the hospital, and then somehow the doctor needs to buy it, needs to really, meaning like embrace this concept, and then you will get it one day. So it goes through many, many layers. So that distribution route is something that's really important to examine. And then the other part of the business model equation is who pays. And again, in healthcare, this part is just not obvious because you could be the patient, and then in the end, there's somebody else who pays. It could be the government, It could be insurance. It could be pharma themselves wanting to pay for a invention. It could be medtech. It could be hospitals that pay for it. It could be somebody else who you not even think about that wants to pay for this. And sometimes it's yourself as well. So who pays is actually an awfully complex kind of equation that we very often think about. And this is what actually many times determines, after you have everything else, after you have the tech, the clinical, the regulatory, after you have all that, in the end, can you actually have a sustainable business, right, that actually makes money? That comes down to the actual business model, and that comes down to distribution and payment, right? Who actually pays for it? Sometimes businesses even have kind of like two different ways, right, to pay. So they might have kind of like D2C, or they might have B2B, and they might have B2B2C. So all these different methods could be a combination of how actually somebody pays. So that's just the first category that we look at. That's the business. Right. So the second category is really the team. So on the team, we always want to fund people who are really passionate, really motivated, who won't give up until they're actually successful. And that is sometimes very hard. And when you think about, funding these teams, because, in my view, I just think that it's way easier to make money in a lot of different fields. I think it's way easier to, just do any other startup than a startup in this particular space, in healthcare, in health tech. This is just really, really, really hard. So if you are not mentally ready for it, we can see people giving up very easily. How can we still see you going at it, in 2 years, in 5 years, in 8 years, right? You have to be mentally resilient. You have to be strong. So testing that is really important. And then, of course, in addition to kind of, testing your passion, your grit, it's also about the founder problem fit, right? Is this founder fit for this problem? You might be a scientist, you might be a professor, you might be a doctor, right? And that might very well be because you see what's going on in that field and you say, okay, I see that fit. We as VCs, we say, okay, we see that fit. Now, there's another fit that we look for, which is really the founder market fit. Because the technology is the technology, but there's everything else, right, that I just talked about that really builds the success of a company. And that comes down to like, what kind of market are you going to? What's your beachhead, right? Which country are you going into? Are you launching this here? Do you see another country that's more suitable for this? And that market might not be what you have to fit with. Right. So if you're saying that, okay, now I'm going to sell this to, pharmacies in the U.S., and then we realize that you are a professor who's based here. Like, how are you going to do that? You might have the perfect founder problem fit, but you might not have the founder market fit. Right. So this is where it's important to have a team. And we see that it's never the case that you just have one person who's just so suitable for everything. It's like impossible. It's next to impossible. Even as investors, it's impossible to have one person who can look at everything in one go. So it's always important to have a team, right? Are you the perfect business development person? Can you be going into hospitals and be selling this, right? Do you have the experience of selling, right? And that's where you need to assemble a team to look at it. So that's where we look at the team assessment. So it's not just about, the founder. Sometimes it's one founder, sometimes it's two, sometimes it's more, but do you have a team in place that can then take the product and then bring it into the market. And then the third area that we look at is really the deal, right? So you might have the perfect, company, you might have the perfect team, and that's all great. But when it comes down to the actual deal, is this a good deal, right? This is what, we as venture capitalists, we think very much about, which is, is it the right kind of terms? Is it the right valuation? If we think that you're worth 10 million US dollars, but you're asking for 100, then obviously there's no deal. If we think that you shouldn't raise that much, but you're asking to raise 20 million, then, we'll be questioning, like, what are you going to do with that 20 million? How does your, next clinical trial actually, cost? What are the milestones that you're trying to achieve with this race? So it's all about kind of, getting the right kind of terms. And then at the same time, ownership, board seat, board observer, that's very important from a governance perspective. Because sometimes we realize that, these are great companies, but they never have a understanding about what governance is actually all about. You need to have, people who are doing the accounting, who are, in charge of, looking at the books. You need people who are approving the corporate items, right? So all those things are really, really important. So with these three, these are the typical kind of, areas that we look at. And then at the same time, because, we as Verge, we are also, very focused on impact. And in healthcare, this is actually very complementary because in impact, in healthcare, if you are improving access, affordability, and quality, and at the same time, you could be minimizing, like, for example, the complexity within healthcare, cost, the need for actual heavy infrastructure, then overall, that could be a nice fit, right? For you to kind of, look at how you can actually create impact in society, in addition to just looking at how your business fits. Now, overall, this whole package should result in a highly attractive opportunity for the VC fund. And what I mean by that is that for VC funds, we look at multiples. Multiples meaning how much do we actually make on this investment. All right. So VC funds, as early as we go, we lose definitely a portion of the portfolio companies. In fact, when you look at all startups in general, more than 90% of the startups actually die. Right. So we need to make sure that the ones that succeed return the fund. Right. So we're looking for high multiples for that. So for example, if we make an investment, we hope that it's going to give us, for example, 10 times return, because the 10 times will make up for all the other ones that die. Right. So that's how the VC math actually works. I'm going to, I think, probably go much quicker now since I'm sort of running out of time. Okay. So this is just to say that I'm going to skip through actually some of these slides. Funding has not been easy. If you look at the overall industry, we've gone through quite a downturn. 2021 was the hype, and following 2022, 2023, everything has looked much, much worse since then. This means that less money is going into venture capital, industry in general, and at the same time, if you look at digital health in particular, this is a time when digital health really was hit. But in 2024, we began to see some recovery, which is good. And then in terms of the different stages, we see that actually the biggest decrease right now, from the past has been in the actual growth stage. So anything that's Series C and beyond, right? There was a hype in 2021 and then very drastically decreasing. So VC funding has overall just, overall decreased, but at the same time, there has been some meaningful increase in 2025. Now, the good thing is that despite economic cycles, innovations actually keep on happening. So, and startups keep on growing. So we're seeing some of that, especially in 2025. 2024 was when we began to kind of pick up the signals for recovery, and that was actually very encouraging globally. just given time, funding pressure in general, just, it's really across different stages of companies. And in fact, when you look at young companies, they tend to raise pretty much every year, every 2 years. But when you look at the number of companies that have actually raised, right, especially on the right-hand side, in the last 12 months, seed stage companies, only 9% of health tech companies have actually raised. Only 5% of all companies have actually raised. This means it's not easy out there for any of the startups that really try to pitch for VC funding. I want everyone to take a guess how many percent of the companies that we see that we actually invest in. Take a guess. 3 is a good guess. Yeah. 1, Charles said 1. 1 is correct. 1 is correct. Less than 1% is the stats from Verge. So that means that we probably see about 1,000. We see way over 1,000 companies a year, but we choose less than 10. Right. So that's how hard it is for to actually get VC funding. And given that I'm out of time, I'm just leaving you this last slide to just talk, to give you, once you come to that stage, right, there are different options, whether it's a safe, convertible, or actual price round. This came from our partner, Cooley, who prepared the slides. But I'll just leave this here since I've run over my time. But thank you very much for your attention today.
Thank you, Scarlett. May I now invite Professor Chan back on stage to present our token of appreciation for your contribution to our summit. Thank you very much. That was Ms. Scarlett CHEN, Managing Partner at Verge HealthTech Fund.